I just closed the door, turned the lock, and listened to him call me selfish from the other side. And still, I didn't open it. Because by the time he realized what he'd lost, I wasn't the same woman he knew. I had already died to him, and he to me. What he said to me that day was a knife wrapped in gift paper. "Mom, this place is too big for you alone. You should consider giving it to us. It would only be fair, don't you think?" And then Stephanie, with that smile that never reached her eyes, added, "You'd be more comfortable in a place more suited for your age." For a second, the world felt like it stopped, not because of the proposal, but because of the way it was said, as if my life, my history, my memories were just an old piece of furniture taking up space, as if I no longer owned anything. But that wasn't the first sign. No, that came much earlier. I remember that night perfectly. I had made my favorite soup, butternut squash with a hint of ginger. The house smelled of melted butter and toasted bread. I set the table with my porcelain plates, the ones we bought with my husband Elias on our first trip to New Orleans. The tablecloth was white with lace borders my mother, Ida Mae, had embroidered. My granddaughter, Riley, was running down the hallway, shouting that she wanted to sit next to me. I was smiling. I was happy, or so I believed. Stephanie was helping me in the kitchen, though it was clear she didn't want to get her long, wine-colored nails dirty. They looked like claws. My son, Glenn, was on the balcony talking on his phone, gesturing as if negotiating a big contract. When he hung up, he came over to me with a bottle of expensive wine. "It's a gift, Mom. You deserve it." It seemed strange. Glenn was never one for thoughtful gestures, but I thought maybe he was changing. During dinner, Stephanie complimented the living room curtains. "So classic, though I would put up something more modern, more minimalist." Glenn gave her a quick nod, as if to say, not to overdo it, but I already felt that uncomfortable tingling in my stomach. Not because of what they were saying, but because of how they were saying it, as if they could already see themselves living here. In her innocence, Riley said something that sent a chill down my spine. "Dad, where will my room be?" Stephanie quickly corrected her. "When we come to visit Grandma, honey." But her eyes betrayed her. A visit was not what they had in mind. That night, as I was collecting the dishes, I noticed Stephanie had left her purse open on the dining room table. On instinct, I went to close it so nothing would fall out. And that's when I saw it. A floor plan of the apartment with handwritten notes. Knockdown hallway wall, open kitchen to living room, master bedroom, Stephanie and Glenn. I was stunned. I didn't say anything. I closed the purse, finished the dishes, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, feeling the weight of every object around me. This was my home, not just a piece of property. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with life, love, and loss. It was where I saw Elias take his last breath. It's where I took my first steps as a mother. It's where I first held Riley in my arms. They couldn't take it from me, not without a fight. The days passed, and the little signs started to appear, almost imperceptible at first. A neighbor asked me if I was moving out. She said she had seen Glenn showing the apartment from the balcony, pointing toward the street and talking about office space. I laughed nervously and said it must have been a misunderstanding, but the doubt lingered. Then, the doorman mentioned that Stephanie had asked if there was a way to duplicate the mailbox key. "She said it was to help you, Mrs. Carter," he told me, but I never asked her to do that. One morning I opened my mail and saw a bank notification. Someone had tried to access my account from a new device. I called the bank. They said my Social Security number had been entered to reset the password. I had to change everything. That's when I knew something very dark was happening. I went to my desk, opened the folder where I kept my documents, and realized 2 papers were missing: the original deed to the apartment and the copy of my will. My heart pounded in my ears. I called my trusted lawyer, a friend named Clara. She told me to meet her at her office. The next day, I arrived with the documents I still had. Clara reviewed everything in silence. She looked at me with an expression that mixed pity and fury. "Yolanda, Your son is trying to transfer the apartment into his name. They used a falsified power of attorney. This is serious." I felt the air leave my lungs, as if someone had emptied me from the inside. Clara helped me block any pending transactions. She recommended I change the locks, secure my accounts, and most importantly, not confront them yet. "Act as if you don't know anything," she advised. "That will give you the advantage." And that's what I did. I became invisible. I started recording our conversations. Every visit, every comment from Stephanie about what she'd do with this kitchen, every phrase from Glenn about when we move in here. Everything was recorded. I also took photos of the floor plan, the messages they sent me, the missed calls at strange hours. I saved every piece of the puzzle. One evening, as Stephanie was making coffee in my kitchen as if she owned the place, Glenn made his final proposal. "Mom, we've thought about it a lot. This place is too big for you. You could live in a smaller apartment, closer to us. We could even help you with the expenses, but we need this space. It's what's best for everyone." He looked at me as if he were being generous. Stephanie put a hand on my arm. "We don't want you to feel lonely, just comfortable. And this place, well, it's not suitable for a lady of your age." My face burned, but I didn't say a word. I smiled. I nodded. I told them I would think about it. And that same night, I called Clara. We began the selling process in secret. A friend of Clara's, a young foreign woman, was looking for a spacious apartment in the area. She saw it in photos and fell in love. I told her the situation. She said, "Let's do this quickly and quietly." We signed the agreement at a different notary. The money was transferred to a new account. Clara accompanied me to change the will. Glenn and Stephanie were left out of everything. Only Riley would receive something, and not until she turned 25. Nothing before, and no one else. For weeks, I pretended everything was normal. I greeted my family with a smile. Stephanie was already talking to decorators. Glenn was measuring the walls. Riley was bringing drawings where she had already put her name on the door of what she believed would be her new room. In the meantime, I secretly packed my most cherished belongings. The photos of Elias, the love letters, the old journals, my mother's necklaces, the signed books, the vinyl records. I packed everything into discreet boxes that I took out of the apartment little by little, like trash bags. Nobody noticed. The final sale was signed on a Thursday morning. At 11:32 a.m., the apartment no longer belonged to me, or to them. At 1:30 p.m., I changed the lock. At 4 o'clock, I was settled into my new home, small, warm, with new curtains and the scent of fresh mint. And that night, when Glenn arrived with Stephanie and Riley to start the move, they found a new lock and a sign taped to the door that read, "Private property, restricted access." They called, they banged, they yelled, but I was no longer there. Stephanie was the first to lose control. She pounded on the door as if with each punch she could break not only the wood, but also the reality that was crashing down on them. "Yolanda, open this door right now. This is crazy," she screamed with that high-pitched, tense voice on the verge of breaking. Glenn, on the other hand, was silent, still, glued to the intercom, dialing my number again and again, as if the sound of the ring could restore the power he thought he had. I watched everything from the building across the street, sitting in the back seat of Clara's car. The tinted windows protected me like a veil. I saw their bodies moving with anxiety, as if each second were another brick in the wall being built between us. "Don't say anything," Clara had warned me. "Let them scream. What hurts a manipulator the most is silence." And she was right. The next day, the messages began. First, the subtle ones. "Mom, we understand you're confused. Maybe someone is manipulating you. We can talk later." Then the passive-aggressive ones. "I never thought you would do this to your own family." After that, the dramatic ones. "Riley is crying. She doesn't understand why her grandma doesn't love her anymore. I saved everything: screenshots, audio, videos. Clara had instructed me well. Everything had to be documented. The third person to enter the scene was Jonathan, Stephanie's brother-in-law, a small-time lawyer who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He sent me a lengthy email with convoluted legal terms, telling me that what I had done could be considered an act of temporary mental incapacitation and that they would have to seek a judicial review of my faculties. I read it 3 times, not because I was scared, but because I was impressed by the audacity. It wasn't enough for them to try to take my apartment. Now they wanted my sanity. I didn't respond with a single word. I just forwarded the email to Clara, who replied in less than an hour with an attached document. "Don't worry, they can't touch you, but we'll secure everything in case they try to go further." I felt like I was in a spy movie, but it wasn't fiction, it was my life. 2 weeks passed. During that time, I changed my number, closed my social media accounts, and notified the few friends I still trusted not to share my new address. Stephanie posted a video on Facebook literally crying, saying that her mother-in-law had been the victim of a scam, that her property had been sold without her realizing it. Glenn appeared in the background, holding Riley with a martyr's face. The video's title was, "What would you do if your mother was deceived and you lost everything?" It got thousands of views and comments from strangers accusing me of being crazy, ungrateful, a cruel mother. A neighbor even left a note in my old building's mailbox saying that ambition destroys families, but I didn't budge. I had spent too long ignoring the signs, doubting my instincts. Now I was standing firm and had no intention of backing down. Every time I listened to those audios of Stephanie screaming in my kitchen that it was already hers, it reminded me why I had to keep going. Every time I saw the floor plan with their notes, I remembered they weren't visitors, they were invaders. Clara accompanied me to the notary, where I updated my will. I made it clear that Glenn would receive nothing, absolutely nothing, no properties, no money, no objects. The only exception was Riley. For her, I left a handwritten, sealed letter that she couldn't open until she was 25. It said, "Dear Riley, I hope one day you'll understand. Love is also about setting boundaries. Your grandma loved you, but she couldn't allow them to destroy her in the name of family." It was the hardest thing, separating an innocent child from the harm her parents were causing. But I also understood that true love isn't blind. It's brave. And sometimes saying no is the purest act of love. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail. It was Glenn. His tone was different. There was no rage, just emptiness. "Mom, I don't know what happened. I don't know when you became so distant. I just wanted to help you. I wanted you to be okay, not to be lonely. But now I don't know if we ever mattered to you." I clutched the phone to my chest. My hands trembled. Because a part of me wanted to believe his words, but I was no longer a naive woman. I knew what he was capable of, and I knew that voice was just another mask, another manipulation. Clara recommended I get out of the city for a few days, disconnect, refresh my soul. I went to a rural house I rented in the mountains, a place with no cell service, no internet, just birds, wind, and the smell of wet earth. There, I walked barefoot, read aloud, and wrote in a hardcover notebook everything I had kept silent for years. The pressure to be a perfect mother, the guilt of saying no, the fear of aging and being seen as a burden. I cried for Elias, for the things we didn't say, for the times I was soft, thinking it was love, for the silences that allowed me to be taken for weak, and after crying, I began to heal. I returned a week later. The scandal on social media had already died down. Stephanie had deleted the video, Jonathan had stopped writing, and Glenn? Glenn had disappeared. I didn't hear from him again. No calls, no letters, no visits, just the echo of his absence. My new house wasn't as big, but it was mine. Every plant on the balcony had a name, every cup had a story, every silence was peace, not a punishment. I woke up early, made coffee with cinnamon, opened the windows, and let the light in without permission. I hung a black and white photo of me and Elias on the wall, smiling in a park in Savannah. I talked to him sometimes, telling him how I had stood up for myself, how I had finally chosen to live. One morning, when I opened the mailbox, I found a letter with no return address. Inside was a drawing from Riley, a yellow sun, a house with flowers, and 3 figures, an older woman, a little girl, and a cat. At the bottom, in crooked letters, it said, "To Grandma, I miss you." I felt a lump in my throat. I put the drawing in a wooden box with Elias's letters. I closed the box. I didn't cry. I just stroked the lid and whispered, "Me too, my love, but I won't go back." And I didn't. Not to the old apartment, not to the obligation-filled birthdays, not to the gatherings where I pretended not to notice Stephanie's disdain, and not to the dinners where Glenn talked without looking at me. I didn't go back, and that was my act of love, of self-love. The world could judge. They could call me cold, calculating, resentful, but no one had lived what I lived. No one had heard what I heard behind closed doors. No one had felt the emptiness of seeing your own son plan your replacement while you were still breathing. I had, and that's why I chose to save myself. For weeks the phone remained silent. No more messages, no more hidden calls. It was as if the world had finally understood my decision, or at least learned not to challenge it. There was something powerful in the silence, not the empty silence of a house with no visitors, but the one that blossoms when you close doors that should never have been opened. The silence of having finally chosen not to be used, the silence of freedom. But peace, like everything in life, is fragile. It was a Tuesday morning when I was returning from the market with a bag full of tomatoes, warm bread, and fresh rosemary. I saw him. Glenn was standing, leaning against the fence in front of my building. He didn't have flowers, he didn't bring gifts, just his arms crossed, his beard grown out, and his eyes filled with something I couldn't decipher right away. Not sadness, not regret. It was something denser, murkier. I didn't say anything. I walked past him without looking, but his voice reached me anyway. "Mom, we need to talk." I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but out of habit. Because no matter how much a woman has rebuilt her life, there's still an echo in her chest that responds to a son's call. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied without turning my head. "Stephanie is pregnant." He blurted it out as if that were a trump card that justified everything. I closed my eyes for a second. I felt the mid-morning sun on the back of my neck. I took a deep breath. The rosemary in my bag released its earthy, sweet scent. And right there, in the middle of the sidewalk, I understood that what he was trying to do wasn't to reconcile. It was to reclaim lost ground. Stephanie was pregnant, and that, once again, made them worthy of my sacrifice, my property, my legacy. I turned slowly. "And what does that have to do with me?" His expression broke for an instant, then recomposed itself. "We need stability, Mom. A home. You have a whole house to yourself. You could come live with us. You could watch your granddaughter grow up, your grandchildren." Every word was measured, calculated like poison in a wineglass. "Yolanda, think about it. We could convert a room into your own space, a little sitting room with your things. You wouldn't be lonely. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." The image was grotesque. Me, reduced to a decorative figure squeezed into a corner of a house that wasn't mine, under rules I wouldn't set, tolerated only until I became a bother. I didn't respond. I just kept walking. I went up the stairs slowly, not because my legs hurt, but because I needed him to see every step, every inch of distance I was choosing. I went inside, closed the door, and changed the lock again that same afternoon. 2 days later, I received a court notice, a request for joint guardianship for family assistance, which, in real terms, meant Glenn was seeking to have me declared in need of supervision for my financial decisions. It was signed by Jonathan. They had attached a fake psychological report where a specialist argued that my behavior was erratic, that there were signs of paranoia, and that the sale of the apartment had been an impulsive action resulting from an untreated emotional crisis. My hands turned to ice as I read, not from fear, but from indignation. It wasn't enough that they had tried to take my space. Now they wanted to erase my judgment, turn me into an incompetent, manageable, fragile old woman. I called Clara. "I was expecting this," she said with a fierce calm. "They don't know who they're messing with." In 48 hours, we had our counterattack prepared. Real medical reports, statements from neighbors, audio recordings of veiled threats, and most importantly, the evidence of the legitimate sale of the apartment without coercion at the notary's office, with signed legal appraisals. Everything was secure. We attended the hearing. I wore a navy blue dress, my hair in a neat bun, with discreet makeup. There was something profoundly humiliating about having to prove that you still owned your own mind, but I stood firm. Jonathan didn't even have the decency to meet my gaze. Glenn, on the other hand, watched me with empty eyes, as if he still didn't understand that this time his mother wasn't going to give in. When the judge delivered his decision, it was simple and forceful. "There is no evidence to support the need for guardianship. Mrs. Yolanda Carter fully retains her legal capacities." Not another word was said. Glenn didn't say anything when we left. Stephanie didn't show up. I walked to Clara's car, feeling that each step was giving me back a little more of the dignity they had tried to steal. The following days were calm. Clara insisted that I leave the country for a while, a short trip to close that chapter, to experience something that didn't have the shadow of Glenn or the echo of Stephanie. I accepted. I went to New Orleans, a city Elias had always wanted to visit and that I had always put off. I stayed in a small apartment with a view of the Mississippi River. I walked the cobblestone streets, listened to jazz coming from open windows. I drank my coffee black in small cups. I was in no hurry. I had no fear. For the first time in decades, I felt like a whole woman. One afternoon, at a viewpoint at sunset, a lady approached me. "Are you alone?" "Yes," I replied, without sadness. She smiled. "That's not always a bad thing." It wasn't here. I was away for 3 weeks. I didn't receive a single message from Glenn. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't wish me a happy birthday, which fell during my second week in New Orleans. He didn't send a drawing from Riley. Nothing. And that, although it hurt, also confirmed everything. When I returned, I found my house intact, the plants green, the books in their place, the air still and clean. Claire was waiting for me with a lemon cake and a letter. "It arrived by certified mail while you were away." I opened it. It was from Jonathan's office. A last-ditch effort, a threat disguised as an apology. They wanted to mediate. They wanted to repair the family relationship. I knew what that meant. They wanted a piece of what didn't belong to them. I burned the letter in my kitchen. I watched the paper wrinkle, blacken, and turn to ash in the breeze coming through the window. Then I wiped the counter as if erasing a final stain. The months passed. I never heard from them again. Peace, that seemingly impossible peace, settled in like a silent guest. I learned to enjoy the simple things. A well-made cup of coffee, a book with the smell of new pages, the sound of rain on the roof. One day I found an old notebook of Elias's. It had doodles, ideas, scattered phrases. On one page, written in his neat handwriting, it said, "The greatest act of love is to stop allowing yourself to be hurt." I cried. I cried like I hadn't since this all began, and that was my catharsis. My son tried to take the little I had left, but he failed because what I had wasn't just an apartment. It was my history, my memory, my decision, and that I no longer give to anyone. I got used to the sound of my own footsteps in the house again, to the way the wooden floorboards creaked at certain spots when I went from the kitchen to the balcony, to the way the light came through the curtains at 6 in the evening, painting everything in a melancholic golden hue. It was a new silence, different from before. It wasn't the silence of abandonment, it was the silence of choice, of the woman who has cleaned every corner, not just of her home, but of her soul. Clara sometimes came over for dinner. She brought wine, laughter, and an energy that contrasted with everything I had lived through in the months before. We talked about literature, politics, travel, sometimes about what had happened, but not as an open wound, but as a scar that no longer hurt to touch. One Saturday in the fall, as I was sweeping dry leaves from the building's garden, the doorman called out to me, "Mrs. Carter, there's a young lady asking for you." I looked at her from a distance. It was Riley. She had grown so much in so little time. She was no longer the shy little girl who hid behind her mother. She was wearing a denim jacket, her hair was loose, and her eyes— I didn't know if she had come looking for answers or to cast blame. We went up to the apartment in silence. I offered her tea. She accepted. She sat on the sofa where we had so often read stories together, but this time the air was different. "Why did you do it, Grandma?" she asked without mincing words. "Do what?" "Sell the apartment, move away, cut him off?" I looked at her for a long time. She was nervous but firm. She hadn't been sent. She had come with her own ghosts. "Because it was necessary," I replied. "Because if I didn't, I would have lost myself." Riley looked down, fidgeting with the cup in her hands. "Dad said you went crazy, that you woke up one day and decided to destroy everything." I smiled, not with tenderness, but with that sadness only mothers know. "Do you believe him?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I just know that since it all happened, no one at home talks about you. Mom doesn't mention you. Dad changes the subject. And me? I don't understand anything." I got up, walked to the sideboard, and took out an envelope. It had been ready for some time. "Here," I said, handing it to her. "These are letters I wrote for you from the first day everything broke. I didn't send them. I didn't want to poison you with our battles, but now I think you deserve to know my side of the story." Riley took it as if it were something fragile. She put it in her backpack without opening it. "Can I come again?" "Always." And she left. I closed the door softly and cried, not from pain, but from relief, because for the first time, I felt that some of the love I had sown in that family hadn't died completely. In the days that followed, I went back to my walks. I went to the park to watch the kids play, to read, to drink coffee on a bench where the sun hit me directly in the face. Sometimes I ran into old acquaintances. They would ask about Glenn, about my grandchildren. I would answer evasively, not out of shame, but because I had learned there are battles you don't explain. You live them, you bury them, and you leave them there. One morning when I returned home, I found an envelope under my door. It had no return address. Inside there was only a single sheet of paper. "If you don't give me what's mine, I will go to all extremes." No signature or date, just that dry threat, like a claw. I called Clara. I told her what happened. She asked me to scan the note and file it. Filing a police report wasn't worth it for now, but leaving a trail was a good idea in case something happened. I started noticing strange things. The intercom would buzz in the middle of the night. Someone would stand in front of the building without moving for long minutes. The hallway lights would turn on for no reason. There was no proof, but there was a presence. I didn't feel fear. I felt rage. One night, I decided to stay up. I sat in the living room with the lights off. The city breathed outside with its slow rhythm, and there, at 3 a.m, I saw him. Glenn again. He didn't knock. He didn't yell. He just stood there in front of the gate. I took a photo from the window, then another and another. I sent them to Clara. "This is no longer legal," she wrote. "We're filing for a restraining order tomorrow." And so we did. The judge issued a restraining order. Glenn couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me or my property. It was the last time I saw him. Riley came back with tears, with underlined letters, with questions, and, little by little, with certainties. "Dad always said you were exaggerating," she told me. "But reading this, I realize he manipulated everything. He used your love. He used our story." I nodded. There was no need to add anything. "I want you to know that I'm not on anyone's side," she continued. "But I do want to know your full story, not as a grandma, but as a woman." And that's what I did. I told her everything from the beginning, from the first signs, from the first, "Mom, can we borrow it for a while?" to the last closed door. She listened without interrupting. And when she said goodbye, she just said, "Thank you for not giving up, for defending your voice." That night, I slept with a calm heart. I knew the story wouldn't have a perfect ending, that there would be no dramatic reconciliations or movie hugs, but there was something better. Justice. A silent, intimate justice woven with every decision I had made. My apartment was now a sanctuary, not of loneliness, but of integrity. I had lost a lot, but I had recovered myself. And for a woman like me, that was worth more than any inheritance. When Riley closed the door that last time, I didn't know if she would ever return. The house fell silent, but it wasn't a sad silence. It was one full of possibility, as if the echoes of the past were finally fading, giving me space to build something of my own, free from the voices that had judged, betrayed, or manipulated me. The weeks that followed were tranquil. My days were filled with small rituals: coffee in the morning with the newspaper open on the table and the sun filtering through the curtains, the plants on the balcony that I once again cared for patiently, the walks along the boardwalk, where sometimes I would stop to look at the water without thinking about anything. I started writing in a notebook with no intention of publishing, just to understand myself. Scattered words, memories, thoughts I had never said aloud. It was like picking up the pieces I had left scattered over the years and putting myself back together. Until one morning, I received a call from my lawyer. His tone was serious, but not alarmed. "Yolanda, a challenge to the will has been filed." I didn't say anything. I expected it. "It's Glenn. He's claiming that you weren't in full use of your mental faculties when you made the changes. He wants it to be declared invalid." I laughed, not out of amusement, but because of the pathetic attempt. "We have everything documented," I reminded him. "Signatures, witnesses, even the medical reports." "I know, and the judge will know too. But be prepared for the noise. This is going to be in the media. Journalists are already asking questions." And he was right. The next day, my face appeared on a sensationalist news website, Sun Tzu's mother for unjustly disinheriting him. They accused me of manipulation and the irregular sale of property. They used an old photo, one where I was smiling with Glenn and Riley in front of the Christmas tree. The headline was aggressive. The text was worse, full of lies, phrases taken out of context, innuendo. But I didn't react. I didn't reply. I didn't call anyone. I just breathed, because I was already beyond all that. Clara helped me prepare a folder with evidence. Every document, every conversation, every date, everything in order. We also included the letters I had written to Riley and the messages she had sent me in response. Not because they were legally necessary, but because they were the thread that proved there was love, clarity, and decision, not insanity. The day of the hearing was gray. I wore my dark blue coat and the scarf my friend Carol had given me before she passed. I entered the courtroom as one who enters to close a story, not to fight it. Glenn was there. He didn't look at me. His lawyer presented absurd arguments. He talked about my age, my emotional fragility, a supposed cognitive decline. He said I had been the victim of a scam, that someone had surely convinced me to act this way, that I wasn't capable of making such drastic decisions on my own. I watched him as if he were talking about another woman. I didn't recognize myself in anything he said. When it was my turn to speak, I did so calmly. I read a statement I had written the night before. I spoke about my history, my life with Glenn, the signs I had ignored, the times I had given in, the betrayal I had lived firsthand. I talked about how I was forced to choose between maintaining a facade and saving my dignity. I chose the latter. The judge listened without interrupting. When I finished, he paused for a long time and then said what I already knew, that there was no evidence to declare the will invalid, that my actions were legal and justified, and that the entire process had been carried out with full knowledge and consent. Glenn clenched his teeth. He didn't say anything. His lawyer collected his papers, resigned. I left the courtroom alone. I walked in the rain without an umbrella. I felt the water cleansing me. I stopped at a secondhand bookstore. I bought a book of poems by a local poet and went home as if returning from exile. The following weeks were even calmer. No one knocked on my door. No more threats were sent. Riley visited me every now and then. She brought me drawings, books. She told me about her plans. She was studying psychology. "I think I have a lot of material to analyze," she joked one day, and we both laughed. One afternoon, she asked me to read one of the poems I had underlined out loud. It was about defending joy like a trench. And I understood that's what I had been doing without knowing it. Defending my joy, my right to live in peace. I was offered an interview for a serious news outlet, a report on older people facing abuse from their own children. I hesitated, but I accepted, not out of revenge, but because if my story could help another woman my age find the courage to say, "Enough," it was worth it. The journalist was respectful. She listened more than she asked. In the end, she hugged me. Her eyes were moist. "Thank you for not staying silent," she told me. When the report was released, the reaction was immediate. I received letters, messages, flowers, women I didn't know who told me I had given them courage. One wrote, "Today I told my son to stop manipulating me. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud, not because I had defeated Glenn, but because I had chosen myself. That night, I wrote my last letter. Not to Riley, not to Glenn, to myself. "Dear Yolanda, you survived. You stood tall when everything was crumbling. You chose silence when screaming was useless. You chose truth when a lie offered comfort. You chose dignity when fear pushed you to surrender. And now you are here, whole, free, alive. Thank you for not abandoning yourself." I closed the notebook. I put it in the memory box along with a photo of me as a child, a letter from my mother, and a dried lavender sprig. Life was moving on, and so was I. At my age, that was more than enough. One morning, while watering my plants, I noticed one of the younger neighbors, Camellia, watching me from the other balcony. At first, I thought she was just hanging clothes or looking at the sky, but when our eyes met, she smiled and raised a coffee cup as if making a toast. "Would you like to come have one with me?" she asked in a clear voice. I nodded. It had been a long time since I'd accepted an invitation like that. I went up one floor, knocked on her door, and she welcomed me with a table already set. Fresh coffee, homemade cookies, a lit candle. The atmosphere was warm, as if she had been waiting for me for a long time. We talked for hours about plants, books, music. She told me that she had recently lost her mother and that she felt lonely. I told her parts of my story in my own way. She didn't need details to understand. "My mom used to say that sometimes you have to break the house from the inside to let the sun in," Camilla said, looking out the window. "You seem like someone who learned that." Her words stayed with me for days. It was then that I decided to travel, not very far. A getaway to the coast, to the same town where I had my honeymoon with Elias. I didn't go for nostalgia. I went to close a chapter. I stayed in a small inn with a view of the ocean. Every morning, I walked along the beach and wrote, not letters or memories. I wrote fictional stories, characters that came from within me but were no longer me. I invented women who escaped, who built new lives, who planted trees and never looked back. One of those stories became my favorite. It was about a woman who, after being betrayed by her own blood, built a library in a town without books. She didn't talk to anyone about the past. She didn't explain anything. She just offered new words to those who passed by. I thought about turning it into a book, but I was in no hurry. When I returned home, spring had begun. My plants were blooming. The lavender, the mint, even the jasmine I thought was dry, was showing new sprouts. That night, I lit a candle, not for nostalgia, but for celebration. I had found myself again. And even if Glenn kept talking, even if he tried to clean up his image, even if some people still looked at me with doubt or whispers, I no longer needed explanations. I owed nothing to anyone. Freedom has a taste you never forget. The days passed, and I received a handwritten letter with no visible return address. The envelope had my full name and a script that looked familiar. I opened it carefully. It was from Robert. Not the Robert I had loved, but the one who had disappeared from my life without saying goodbye. Glenn's father, absent for decades. Yolanda, I heard about everything too late. About you, about our son, about how it all ended. I don't know if I have the right to write to you, but I'm doing it anyway. I was a coward. I left without knowing what I would leave behind. I failed everyone. But most of all, I failed you. I read your story. I listened to it, and I have no words. Just one wish. That you find peace. That you have been able to heal what I broke. I didn't cry. There were no tears for that. Just a strange feeling, as if life was closing a door I had already forgotten was open. I kept the letter, not for what it said, but for what it symbolized, the past, acknowledging that it no longer had power over me. On the last day of that week, Riley brought me a gift, a hand-painted wooden box. "For your new stories," she said, "the ones you're going to write now." Inside, there was a fountain pen, a hardcover notebook, and a small bottle of blue ink. On the first page, she had written a single line, "I didn't inherit your house, but I'm inheriting your strength." I hugged her, as if it were the last time. That night I wrote again, but not about pain or loss. I wrote about a garden that grew among ruins, about a woman who, even with scars, danced alone in the rain, about silence as a form of victory, and about forgiveness, not as a gift to others, but as a closure you give yourself. I ended the story with a phrase that, without knowing it, defined me. I didn't leave. I found myself, and this time I slept without nightmares because I was finally free. I never imagined that silence could weigh more than a scream, but at that point in my life, I realized that silence also speaks. Sometimes it says more. Sometimes it screams from within, like an echo no one else hears, but that vibrates in your bones. And in those days, everything around me was wrapped in that kind of silence, thick, dense, almost tangible. It wasn't loneliness, it was something else, a long pause before a new act. I was no longer the woman I used to be. I was no longer the complacent mother, nor was I just the victim. I had transformed into something new, something stronger, but also colder, more calculating. I found myself thinking about my next steps with surgical precision. I observed, listened, and planned as if my whole life had become a chessboard, and I finally understood the rules. Glenn, meanwhile, kept trying. He knew he had lost, but his ego wouldn't let him accept that a 62-year-old woman, his mother, had won the game. So he started looking for cracks, small openings to get back in. He appealed to everything: the press, social media, acquaintances, even old friends of mine I hadn't seen in years. I received messages filled with fake concern. "Yolanda, we heard what happened. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" At first, I hesitated. I thought maybe someone was genuinely interested, but a brief conversation was enough to recognize the script. Pointed questions, empty compliments, subtle comments to get me to say something out of place. I didn't fall for it. I had removed Glenn from my will, sold the apartment without him knowing, changed all the locks, and disappeared from his maps. But I wasn't finished. There was one last move left, the decisive one. I contacted my lawyer. I asked for advice on a legal concept I had learned about from a friend: the declaration of unworthiness to inherit. It wasn't enough to disinherit him. I wanted it so that at the time of my death, he couldn't even challenge anything or claim what wasn't his. I wanted to cut all the legal roots that connected him to me. The process was complex. It required proving that his actions were serious enough to justify the measure. But I had evidence. Videos, messages, witnesses, everything documented. And most importantly, I had my word, my truth, which no longer hid or apologized for existing. While we were preparing the documentation, I made another decision. I sold my second apartment, the small one I still had in a more distant neighborhood. With that money, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought a small property in a coastal town in the south, a single-story house with a front garden and fruit trees in the back, a place where no one knew me, where I could start over, where neither Glenn nor his stories could reach me. But I didn't move immediately. I needed to close some doors first, and one of them was Riley. The last time we saw each other, she told me she didn't want to choose between her father and me, but the real world doesn't always allow for neutrality. As the months passed, I realized that her silence was a choice, a way of protecting herself, yes, but also a way of leaving me alone. She never wrote to me. She never asked how I was. She never showed up. So I wrote one last letter, not to reproach her, not to hurt her, just to tell her the truth. Riley, I don't expect you to choose. You already did. I won't judge you. Everyone carries their history as best they can. But sometimes, silence is also a betrayal. And in the darkest moments, I looked for you, and you weren't there. I don't hold a grudge. I just wanted you to know that I loved you very much, and that even though I no longer expect anything from you, I wish you peace and freedom like the one I finally found. I didn't sign it with Mom, just with my name, Yolanda. I left it in her mailbox on a rainy morning. I didn't wait for a reply. The day I signed the sale of the apartment, I felt a strange relief. It wasn't sadness. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't just bricks and cement I was leaving behind. It was years of pain, of compromises, of forced silences. With the deed signed, I took a taxi, picked up my few belongings. I had already given away or sold almost everything, and headed south. The journey was long. We crossed endless highways, open fields, silent curves. I had headphones on, but I didn't play music. I preferred the sound of the engine, the wind, the faint rattling of the wheels on the asphalt. I arrived at dusk. The house was just as I remembered it, simple, cozy, bright. A neighbor, Julia, greeted me with a homemade loaf of bread. She told me not to hesitate to knock on her door if I needed anything. I thanked her, but I knew I wanted to live this chapter alone, in silence, at my own pace. The first few days, I focused on cleaning, organizing, and planting some seeds in the garden. Lavender, mint, jasmine. I reconnected with the earth, with the smell of dampness, with the creaking of the wood, with the bird song at dawn. And then one night, the news came. Glenn had been sued for fraud, not by me, but by another woman, an ex-girlfriend. He had falsified documents, manipulated bank accounts, taken out loans in her name. The scandal was all over the media. His face, the same one that had yelled at me in front of my old door, was now everywhere, no longer as the grieving son, but as a swindler. I didn't feel satisfaction or revenge, just a sigh, as if the universe had finally put things in their place. I filed the news article in a folder, not out of resentment, but for the record, for justice. A week later, Riley sent me a brief email with no greeting. I saw what happened with Dad. I don't know what to say. I just hope you're doing well. I didn't reply. It was too late. I had crossed a threshold from which I would not return. My new house had a large window that overlooked the ocean. Every morning, I would sit there with a cup of tea and watch the sun rise over the waves. It was a ritual, a way of reminding myself that time moves on, that even after the fiercest storms, the day still comes. One afternoon, while watering my plants, I found a note under the door. It was from Julia, the neighbor. She was inviting me to a poetry reading at the town library. I hesitated, but I went. I entered quietly. I sat in the back row. An older man read verses by his deceased wife. A little girl recited a made-up poem about the clouds. And then, I don't know how, they offered me the microphone. I took it, took a deep breath, and for the first time, I read one of my own texts. I didn't leave. I found myself. The room fell silent, and then they applauded. Not for the talent, but for the truth. That day, I understood that I didn't need to get revenge on anyone. The deepest victory is to live without fear, without debts, without depending on the forgiveness of others. That night, I lit a candle, not for nostalgia, but for gratitude, because I was alive and finally free. Time doesn't heal, but it clarifies, like old wine at the bottom of the bottle that holds its most bitter essence. That's how the weeks after my reading at the library were. Each day brought a different breeze, a new smell, an unexpected feeling. I would get up early, water the plants, walk on the beach, read some forgotten book on the living room shelf, but always, at some point, the memory would return. Not with pain, but with a strange mix of relief and vertigo, as if I were looking into an abyss that could no longer swallow me. I didn't regret anything, but I didn't celebrate either. It was a strange, dense, silent calm. One afternoon, as I was walking through the town market, I noticed something different. A look, a murmur, a gesture. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but when I got home, I confirmed it. In the mailbox, there was a letter with no return address, no postage stamp, just my name written in a familiar hand. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a single phrase, "You're going to destroy all of us." The handwriting was Glenn's. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't scared either. But it made me wonder who he meant by us, him and Riley, the family in general, his allies. The truth was, I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had only protected what I had left, my peace, my freedom, my truth. But I understood that for some people, that was already a threat. I put the note in a drawer, not because I feared anything, but because everything could be useful later. I was meticulous about it. Every word, every gesture, every veiled threat was now part of my personal file, not out of paranoia, but out of caution. That same night, I received a call. Hidden number. I didn't answer. Seconds later, a voicemail. It was Riley's voice. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but there are things I don't know how to handle. Dad is becoming more and more erratic. He says you're spying on him, that you're planning to ruin his life. I don't know what to do. Sometimes he scares me." Pause. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just needed to say it. Another pause. A sigh. "I miss you." I turned off the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't reply. I was no longer moved by half-hearted phrases or lukewarm affections. I learned that love shouldn't hurt, and that those who choose silence during a shipwreck don't deserve the rudder when the calm arrives. But something in that message unsettled me. Glenn was losing control, and a desperate man is capable of anything. The next few days were strangely quiet. Julia, my neighbor, brought me some cookies. I went to the book club. I bought a bicycle. I felt light, but something told me that this peace was just the calm before the storm. And I wasn't wrong. One morning when I opened the door, I was met by a camera, a man with a microphone, another with headphones, and a young female journalist with a serious face and an affected tone. "Yolanda Carter?" I nodded in silence. "We're doing a report on family inheritance conflicts. Your case has gained notoriety on social media. Would you like to give your side of the story?" I closed the door without saying a word. I wasn't surprised. Glenn had friends in the media. He knew how to manipulate narratives. He was an expert at looking like a victim and had surely leaked information, distorted facts, and shown only one part of the story, the one that benefited him. That night, the report aired. Julia showed it to me, with an indignant look on her face. The mother disinherited him on a whim. He only wanted to help her move. It accused me of betrayal and emotional theft, a story that moved the whole country. The images were edited with sad music, old photos of us when he was little, birthday videos, cut out fragments of audio, and a testimony from an anonymous woman, surely paid, who claimed I had always been manipulative. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of amusement, but because it was absurd. It was so easy to distort a life. And then I understood. Glenn wasn't seeking justice. He was seeking public revenge, to destroy my image, ridicule me, and force me to respond and enter his game. But I was no longer playing. I gave my answer in my own way. I went to a notary with my lawyer. We drafted a public document in which I explained, without attacks or names, that I had been a victim of psychological manipulation, that I had taken legal measures to protect myself, and that I did not wish to feed the media circus. The notary published it as an open letter on paper, without social media or interviews. I left it in silence. The media, of course, didn't cover it. But something changed. A week later, I received another letter, this one handwritten from Riley. "Mom, I saw everything, the report, your letter. I feel like I'm in the middle of a war I never wanted, but I can't pretend anymore. Dad is out of control. He follows me. He checks my cell phone. He accuses me of being on your side. I'm scared. I don't want to live like this." Pause. More text. "I realize now that I was wrong to leave you alone. I thought I could stay neutral, that everything would work itself out, but it didn't. You acted with dignity. He acted with hate." Last paragraph. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know that's not enough, but I want to start over, if you'll let me." I read the letter several times. I didn't know what to feel. I left it on the table, went out to the garden, took a breath, and remembered something my mother once told me when I was young and proud. Forgiveness isn't a door. It's a crack where light can enter. I went back inside. I wrote a brief response. "Riley, wars end when someone lays down their arms. I'm not waiting for you, but if you come in peace, I'll be here." I sent it by mail. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, but it wasn't the end. The next day, I found the garden gate forced open, a plant pulled out of the ground, a fleeting figure that fled into the bushes. I called the police. I didn't report anyone, but I made a statement. Glenn had crossed a line, and I had to put an end to it. The police didn't take long to arrive that morning. 2 young officers, polite but skeptical, asked me if there were cameras, witnesses, anything more than a suspicion. I showed them the twisted gate, the footprints in the damp earth, the broken flower pot. One of them nodded with a resigned expression. "It could be anything, ma'am, but we'll file a report." They took notes, gave me a sealed paper, and left as if it were a childish prank. But I knew it wasn't a thief. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, a warning. I filed the police report with the other documents in the black folder on my desk, the one I had labeled legal backup. At that point, my house was no longer just a sanctuary. It was a fortress. Everything I did, said, or received was recorded. I had learned that in a war of attrition, the best weapon is persistence. That afternoon, as I was making coffee, the doorbell rang. I cautiously looked out. It was Riley, without makeup, without jewelry, without a car, and alone. I buttoned my coat. I crossed the garden and opened the door without saying a word. "Can I come in?" she asked in a trembling voice. I nodded. She walked slowly to the living room, as if each step weighed years. We sat in silence. For a while, the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the steam from the coffee maker. "I didn't know where to start," she finally said. "I was speechless many times, but I can't do this anymore. Glenn is out of control. I've lost him, or maybe he lost himself. I don't know, but every day is worse. He accuses me of betrayal, of conspiring with you. He checks my calls. He controls my schedule. I don't even know who he is anymore." I looked at her calmly. "And now you're coming to ask me to—" Riley wasn't a question. It was a line, a boundary. She understood. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you that I was wrong, and that if you ever want to rebuild something with me, I'll be here, no strings attached." Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. "I hear you," I finally said. "That's all I can promise right now." She nodded, stood up, hugged me without squeezing, and left. When I closed the door, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was the end of waiting. I no longer carried the need to be understood. I had said everything, done everything, shown everything. The rest was not up to me. But what was up to me was about to be resolved. That same night, I received a court notice. Glenn was suing me for wrongful eviction and financial manipulation. I read every page carefully. Empty words, phrases written by an expensive lawyer. He intended to prove that I wasn't in full use of my faculties, that I had been influenced by external elements, and that my change of will was the result of psychological pressure. The document was a mixture of insult and threat, but it didn't shake me. I was prepared. My lawyer, the same one who helped me sell the apartment in secret, responded in record time. He presented all the evidence: Glenn's letters, the messages, the recordings, the previous police reports, the sale carried out with full faculties, the renewed will with witnesses and a notary. But there was something else. Something I had been saving for this very moment. An audio recording. One night, weeks ago, while I was talking to Carol on the phone, Glenn had accidentally left a voicemail. He thought he had hung up, but he hadn't. In the recorded message, you could hear him talking to someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a friend, and saying word for word, "She's going to fall on her own. She's old, she's alone. A good couple of articles in the media, a few posts with old photos, and that's it. No one will question if we have her committed." My lawyer listened to it 3 times. He looked at me in silence and said, "This doesn't just close your defense. This sinks him." We submitted the audio as part of the case file, added the police report, included Riley's letter as voluntary testimony, and then we did something else. We requested a preventive restraining order. The judge, upon reading the material, did not hesitate. Glenn was prohibited from approaching within 500 yards of my home. No calls, no messages, no social media, no contact through third parties. When he received the notice, his response was immediate: a video. He posted a 3-minute clip on his social media, crying, accusing me of disloyalty, of destroying his family, of brainwashing his wife, of leaving him with nothing. The images were manipulated. He used fragments from birthdays, photos of me laughing with him as a child, family scenes taken out of context. But he made a mistake. He included an image taken inside my old house on a date after the sale, a photo where he appeared on the balcony with a glass of wine, as if he still lived there. What he didn't know was that on the exact date of that photo, I had already changed the lock. He shouldn't have had access, and yet he had entered. That detail helped us to expand the complaint: trespassing, invasion of privacy, judicial disobedience. The judge, seeing the recurrence, was clear. We are facing a systematic campaign of harassment and manipulation. He authorized more severe measures, including digital monitoring, and summoned Glenn to testify. I, meanwhile, kept my routine intact: gardening, reading, silence, peace. But inside me, something was beginning to blossom. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. One morning, the courthouse called me. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Glenn Carter, appeared this morning accompanied by a defense attorney, but he refused to testify. However, due to the accumulation of evidence, the judge has decided to proceed with a public hearing. Are you willing to attend? I nodded. It was time. The hearing was set for the following Thursday in an old building with high columns and long echoes. I sat in the front row next to my lawyer. Glenn arrived a half-hour late. He was wearing a dark suit and had the face of a martyr. The judge called for silence, read the file, presented the evidence, played the audio, read Riley's letter, showed the photo from the balcony, and asked if Glenn wished to make a statement. He only mumbled that it had all been a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The judge was firm. Not only is there no evidence of manipulation on the part of Mrs. Carter, there is clear evidence of persecution, coercion, and improper use of public media to defame her image. The verdict was brief: an extended restraining order for 2 years, an order to remove all public defamatory content, a fine for emotional distress, a prohibition of contact, and a symbolic conclusion. The judge, in a quiet voice, said, "Sometimes cutting ties is healing." When I left the courthouse, the sun hit my face like a caress. I didn't feel glory or triumph. I felt freedom, and that was all I needed. The week after the trial was, on the surface, calm. No unknown car circled the block. No envelope without a return address arrived in the mailbox. No one knocked on my door. No one shouted my name from the gate. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same as before. This wasn't the silence of waiting, but the silence of the aftermath. The one that comes when a war ends and all that's left is the sound of the wind over the ruins. Riley sent me a handwritten letter. She told me she had moved into a boarding house in Ocean City, that she had gotten a part-time job at a bookstore, and that every night she read fragments of Toni Morrison to fall asleep. She wished me peace. She didn't ask for anything. She signed with violet ink, like when she was young. I didn't reply, not out of anger or coldness, but because it was no longer necessary. We had closed that chapter with dignity, and I had learned that not all goodbyes require words. Some just happen, like leaves falling from a tree when autumn arrives. They don't make a sound. They just go. Carol, for her part, came over every Tuesday. We would drink jasmine tea in the garden. We talked about simple things, recipes, the news, neighborhood stories. But every now and then, in the gaps in our conversation, we would let a phrase about them slip out, not as someone who reopens a wound, but as someone who points to a scar that no longer hurts. One day, however, she brought me a gift, a small olive bonsai. So you'll remember that some roots, however slow, always grow strong. I put it on the windowsill. Every morning, I would look at it when I woke up, and even though it seemed fragile, it withstood all the winds. One afternoon in March, I decided to do something I had put off for years. I went to the attic. I climbed the stairs slowly with a flashlight in my hand. Dust, old boxes, winter clothes, photos, books, notebooks with folded pages. I knelt in front of the blue trunk that had belonged to my mother. I opened it. Inside, among other things, was the wool blanket we had knitted together during the cold nights of my teenage years and a cardboard box with postcards. One in particular caught my attention. It was from a park in a small town in New England with an empty bench in front of a lake. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, "The important thing isn't that you stay, it's that you know how to leave when you are no longer needed." I read that phrase out loud several times, and I understood. I understood that my role as a mother wasn't to cling, but to let go. It wasn't to protect at all costs, but to set boundaries. It wasn't to always fix things, but to say, "This is where I stop." Glenn was no longer my child. He had chosen his path. And even though it hurt, it was no longer my responsibility to fix what he had chosen to break. That same day, I sat in front of my computer. I wrote a brief, clear, unembellished message. I sent it to my lawyer. I want to make one last change to my will. In the new version, in addition to excluding Glenn, I stipulated that upon my death, a significant portion of my assets would be donated to an organization that supports older women in situations of financial or emotional abuse. Women like me, I told the notary as I signed, who endured out of love, fear, or habit, and one day said, "Enough." He looked at me with respect, sealed the document, and gave me a copy. I felt light, as if all the years of burden had suddenly been lifted. The weeks continued on their course, the leaves fell, the afternoons grew shorter. I started walking on the boardwalk every morning. I greeted the neighbors. I bought fresh flowers. I learned to make whole wheat bread. I started writing in my journals again. One night, it was raining hard, the kind of rain that hits the roofs like a confession. I made myself a cup of mint tea, turned on the lamp in the corner, and sat down to read. The sound of the rain mixed with the soft music from the vinyl record. In the midst of that quiet, my gaze fell on a framed photo. Me, when I was young, with Glenn in my arms. We were both smiling. He was wearing a red hat, and I was wearing a white linen dress. I went closer. I took it in my hands, and without thinking too much, I put it in a box, closed it, and stored it in the back of the closet, not to forget him, but to let go of the version of him that no longer existed. Because part of grieving is understanding that you can't live forever in the portrait of a memory, that you have to make space for other images, other memories, other ways of being. The next day, I donated several items: clothes, notebooks, cushions, books I no longer read. The house breathed more deeply. The silence was gentle. The light entered without obstacles. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. I looked at the bonsai. The olive tree had a new leaf. I smiled. Carol arrived with croissants. We laughed about things that didn't matter. We talked about the neighbor's cat, about a documentary that was on television. She asked me if I was thinking of traveling. Maybe, I said. To New England. There's a bench in front of a lake I want to see. She looked at me with a knowing smile. So, are you ready? She asked. I nodded. In that moment, I understood something. Not all rebirths are explosive. Some happen quietly. There are no fireworks or standing ovations, just a serene certainty that we are alive, and this time no one has the keys to our house or to our body or to our name. One day, I opened the closet and found my white linen dress. I put it on and went out into the garden. The sun caressed my skin. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary. The bees buzzed around the flowers. I sat on the bench under the lemon tree. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about the past, or the trial, or the screams, or the betrayals, or even revenge. I thought about myself, about what I had saved, about what I had rebuilt, about what, despite everything, could still bloom. And then, without hurry, without drama, without tears, I said in a quiet voice, "They never touched my name again." Then I got up, went into the house, turned off my phone, and opened the window. Did you like my story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.